This is one of the most advanced countries on Earth. Gleaming skyscrapers, the fastest internet in the world, global giants like Samsung and Hyundai, music and films that conquered the planet. By almost every measure of success, South Korea is a triumph, and yet quietly, it is disappearing. This is the story of how the world's most advanced country began, slowly, to kill itself. Here is the number that terrifies economists and demographers around the world. In 2023, South Korea's fertility rate fell to 0.72. That means the average Korean woman is expected to have fewer than 3/4 of one child in her lifetime. To simply keep a population stable, that number needs to be around 2.1. South Korea's is the lowest ever recorded for a nation, anywhere in human history. To understand how this happened, you have to understand where South Korea came from. In 1953, at the end of the Korean War, the country lay in ruins. It was one of the poorest nations on the planet, poorer than much of Africa, its cities flattened, its people starving. Almost no one believed it could recover. The country's GDP per capita was lower than Sudan's. Infrastructure was destroyed. Millions of refugees had nowhere to go. What followed was one of the greatest transformations in economic history. It was remembered as the miracle on the Han River. In just a few decades, South Korea rebuilt itself into an industrial powerhouse. Enormous family-run conglomerates, known as chaebols, drove the transformation. Samsung, Hyundai, LG SK Group. These four families became the engine of Korean growth, building everything from ships to semiconductors. A ruined country became one of the richest and most technologically advanced on Earth. South Korea's GDP grew over 300-fold. It went from receiving foreign aid to giving it. By the 21st century, South Korea had become a global cultural superpower. K-pop groups filled stadiums on every continent. Korean films swept the world's biggest awards. Its cosmetics, phones, and cars became symbols of the future. To the outside world, South Korea looked like a country that had won, but that victory came at a hidden, staggering cost. Cost begins in childhood. In South Korea, education is not just important, it is a war. A child's entire future is believed to rest on which university they attend. Their career, their status, even their marriage prospects. Everything depends on a single number. And so from a very young age, Korean children are pushed into a system of relentless, almost inhuman academic pressure. After a full day of regular school, most Korean students go to hagwons, private cram schools where they study late into the night. It is common for teenagers to study for 12, 14, even 16 hours a day. Childhood, in the way much of the world understands it, is replaced by an endless competition. Play and rest are luxuries most cannot afford. It all builds toward a single day. The Suneung, South Korea's national college entrance exam, an 8-hour marathon test that many Koreans believe will determine the entire course of their lives. Students prepare for it for years. Families pour their entire savings into it. The pressure is almost impossible to imagine. On exam day, the entire country reorganizes itself around these teenagers. The stock market opens late, so traffic is lighter. Construction is paused. During the English listening section, airplanes are grounded across the nation. An entire modern country holds its breath for one exam. Nothing better captures how much is riding on it. This obsession comes at enormous financial cost. South Korean families spend some of the highest sums in the world on private education. For many families, having even one child in this system is financially punishing. Having 2 or 3 can feel simply impossible. And this is where the crisis truly begins. The pressure does not end with school. It follows Koreans into the workplace. South Korea has long had some of the longest working hours in the developed world. A culture of intense dedication means employees are expected to stay late, follow strict hierarchies, and put the company above almost everything else, including their own health and families. The strain is so severe that the Korean language has a specific word for it: gworosa, death by overwork. People who work themselves quite literally into the grave. Beyond the office, there is often an expectation to attend late-night company dinners and drinking sessions. The line between work and life blurs until there is barely any life left at all. And despite years of grueling study and a prestigious degree, a good future is far from guaranteed. Youth unemployment and underemployment have become serious problems. Many young Koreans emerge from the education war exhausted and unable to find the stable, well-paid jobs they were promised. The deal that drove the miracle, work hard and you will be rewarded, quietly stopped being true. Then there is the cost of simply having a place to live. In Seoul, housing prices have soared to staggering levels. For a young person on an ordinary salary, The dream of owning a home in the capital can feel completely out of reach. Many spend years just trying to afford a small apartment, delaying every other part of life in the process. Marriage, children, everything waits because the basics cost too much. Under all of this pressure, a generation began to break. Korean young people gave a name to their predicament. First came the Sampo generation, those who had given up three things: dating, marriage, and children. But it did not stop at three. It grew into the NPO generation, those who felt forced to give up an endless number of things: relationships, homes, careers, hope for the future itself. Online, young Koreans coined a darker phrase for their country: Hell Joseon. Joseon was the old Korean dynasty. By pairing it with hell, they described a modern nation that felt like a rigid, unfair, feudal trap. A place where no matter how hard you worked, you could never truly get ahead. The miracle, to many of its own children, had started to feel like a prison. This despair hardened into a belief that success was no longer about effort, but about birth. Koreans began describing society in terms of spoons. If you were born into a wealthy, connected family, you were a gold spoon. If you were born poor, you were a dirt spoon, and no amount of work would let you climb. When a generation stops believing that effort can change their fate, something fundamental breaks. In this environment, marriage began to seem like a luxury rather than a milestone. Weddings are expensive. Housing is unaffordable. Careers are precarious. For many young Koreans, the traditional path of marrying and starting a family simply does not add up, and so, increasingly, they choose not to walk it at all. For women in particular, the calculation is stark. In a work culture that often penalizes mothers, having a child can mean sacrificing a career built through years of brutal competition. Many women face an impossible choice between professional survival and motherhood. Faced with that choice, more and more are deciding that children are a cost they cannot pay. These pressures have also fueled a bitter divide between the sexes. Frustrated young men and young women increasingly blame each other for their hardships. The conflict spills across politics and the internet. Some women, rejecting the traditional expectations placed on them entirely, embraced movements that refused dating, marriage, and childbirth. The gender war deepened the very trends driving the population down. The mathematics of this are merciless. A fertility rate of 0.72 means that with each generation, the number of children is cut to roughly a third of the one before. If nothing changes, projections suggest South Korea's population of around 51 million could fall to less than half that by the end of the century. It would be one of the fastest peacetime population collapses ever seen. A shrinking, aging population means fewer workers to power the economy, fewer soldiers to fill the ranks of a military that still faces North Korea across a tense border, and fewer young people to support a growing tide of the elderly. A society built for constant growth suddenly has to imagine constant decline. And here the story turns truly dark. All of this pressure, competition, isolation, and lost hope has contributed to a devastating mental health crisis. For years, South Korea has had one of the highest suicide rates in the developed world, the highest among the OECD group of wealthy nations. Behind the gleaming success is a profound and widespread suffering. Among young people, the pressure of competition and comparison takes a terrible toll. Social media amplifies every failure and every gap between expectation and reality. And among the elderly, a different kind of despair takes hold, one rooted not in exhaustion, but in poverty and abandonment. Roughly 4 in 10 South Koreans over the age of 65 live in relative poverty, one of the highest rates in the developed world. Many worked their entire lives through the miracle years, only to reach old age with little pension and little security, forced to keep working into their 70s and 80s just to survive. Isolation compounds the suffering. As families shrink and communities fray, more people live and die alone. There is a Korean term for it: gadoksa, a lonely death. Those who pass away isolated and unnoticed, sometimes discovered only long afterward. It is a quiet symptom of a society where the bonds that once held people together have been stretched thin by relentless competition. The pressure to succeed also warps how people see their own bodies. South Korea is often called the plastic surgery capital of the world. In a hyper-competitive society, appearance is treated as another asset in the race for jobs and status. Cosmetic procedures have become strikingly common, sometimes given as graduation gifts. The pressure to be perfect extends even to one's face. Faced with these trends, the South Korean government has not stood idle. Over the past 2 decades, it has poured the equivalent of hundreds of billions of dollars into reversing the decline. Cash payments for newborns, subsidized childcare, extended parental leave, housing support for young couples. By almost any measure, it is one of the most expensive efforts of its kind in history, and it has largely failed. The fertility rate continued to drop even as spending increased. In 2024, it fell even further to 0.68. Why does the money not work? Because the crisis is not really about money. It is about the entire structure of a society. You cannot pay someone to want to raise a child in a world of 16-hour study days, brutal work culture, and unaffordable homes. The birth rate is not the disease, it is the symptom, and the disease is the very machine that built the miracle. The effects are already visible across the country. Maternity wards and kindergartens are closing for lack of children. Rural schools stand empty, their playgrounds silent. Whole villages are fading as the young leave and the old remain. In some towns, there are years when not a single baby is born. The future is arriving early, and it looks like emptiness. South Korea is not alone. Japan faces its own aging crisis. China's population has begun to shrink. Much of Europe and the developed world is drifting toward the same cliff. But South Korea is the furthest along, the fastest falling, and so the whole world is watching it as a kind of warning. A glimpse of where relentless competition and success without balance may ultimately lead. The tragedy of South Korea is not that it failed. It is that it succeeded, spectacularly, and that its success became the very thing consuming it. A nation that clawed its way from the ashes of war to the peak of the modern world did it by demanding everything from its people. And now, having given everything, its people are quietly declining to hand the same burden to another generation. Whether South Korea can pull back from the edge is one of the great questions of our time. It would require not just money, but a fundamental rethinking of what a good life means. Shorter hours, gentler schools, fairer chances, a society that measures people by more than their rank. The country that engineered an economic miracle now faces a harder task, engineering a reason to hope. A country can build itself into a miracle in a single generation. But if that miracle demands everything from its people, they may quietly choose not to build the next one. If any of the struggles in this story feel familiar to you, please know that you are not alone and that support is available. You can reach a crisis helpline in your country at any time. Reaching out is a sign of strength.